Thank you for joining us. Our show today will focus again on issues of significant concern to many people nationwide. Hardly anything can be more important than one's sense of financial security. With many people unemployed, even at risk of losing their homes, our guest today is attorney Roy Oppenheim, who is recognized as one of the leading experts in the area of foreclosure defense, and he appears frequently in the national media, including the New York Times, USA Today, and he'll share his views on the economy and Wall Street and a lot more following these messages.
There is no mystery as to why families are having their homes foreclosed. The subprime mortgage is the term that is used to symbolize the fact that the financial system went into crisis in 2008. But what caused the bankers to recklessly lend money to people who couldn't afford it? It was the pursuit of the unearned gains from land. Land is the one asset that delivers the largest, apparently safest capital gain to speculators. But historically we know that it's not the safest asset. Time and again there is a property boom and then a big bust. And the people who pay the price are the families whose homes are repossessed. That instability is driven by the pursuit of capital gains from land. Well, if that's the reason, then surely that is where policy should be focused. Not talking about re-regulating the bankers, greedy bankers and their bonuses, all of which, yes, happened. Yes, there were crooks, there were scams, a lot of money was made, but none of that would have been possible if the financial system was structured so as to reward the people who go to work, who add value to the economy, who produce goods and services that they can sell to the consumers. Our tax system penalizes those people. Instead, what we do is reward the pursuit of capital gains from land. It's not the buildings that make the real money, the big bucks for the developers. It's the land underneath those buildings, the capital gains. And the tax system privileges people who speculate in land, hoarding it for not just years but decades, making towns sprawl. This is an example of the huge waste of capital, scarce capital, that could be used in other ways. Roads that lead to nowhere, to barren land that was supposed to be developed by the speculators who wanted to make the financial killing. Instead, having installed the infrastructure, the market went belly up. Now these plots will remain vacant for years, if not decades. But in the meantime, the money that was invested in highways such as this one could have been used for schools and hospitals. Not more than a mile away from here, there's a school, brand new, empty. It will not now be used because the local government has run out of money. It can't afford to pay for the teachers to staff the school. So having invested in that school, the building, an Olympic-sized swimming pool, children will not be educated in that institution, because the property tax here in America is not now generating enough revenue to pay for the staff, the school books and the tuition that the children of America badly need.
At 77, Murray Sirota has seen it all. Born during the Depression and lived through several wars, he now often spends time at a Florida senior center where his thoughts are on the mood of America.
Very sad, we're very down. Things are not working out the way they're supposed to.
Working as a volunteer, Sirota says he hears about the troubled economic times, gas prices, home foreclosures, and he says it's led to a lack of trust in government, something different from the days of his heroes, FDR, Harry Truman.
That's going to be hard to get again, but trust is very important. I mean, I personally, again, wouldn't trust the government as far as I could throw them.
But it's not just government. It's people themselves.
If something went wrong, oh, I'm going to sue you. I mean, you know, it's like you're brought up with that. Not that it's right.
The mood in America may be down, both nationally and here in Florida among senior citizens. But one thing when talking to seniors, though, they always have something worse they can compare it to.
I don't think we're as bad yet as it was during the Depression of the 30s. I mean, that was an entirely different story. But I hope we're on the way to get there.
What is his solution? A major shakeup in Washington and hope for the young.
I guess the crisis kind of helped us out. We had a baby on the way and we were looking to move into an apartment to rent, and it was so expensive. We said, we can't afford it, you know. We started thinking, well, maybe now is the time to look at all the stuff that's foreclosed on and bank owned and no one wants it. So we were lucky to get this place for less than half of what it would have been 2 years before. And we get to share it with our friends, with our community, and grow food. It's much more cost effective, and I think that's why people are also getting behind it right now, because I read something, I forget, it's like a 6 time you six-fold your money.
Oh, right.
Like, let's say you buy a tomato plant for $3. The amount of tomatoes you get from it is like 6 times more than what it would cost you to buy the tomatoes.
Right.
And it's also making people aware that they can do it in their apartment, because, you know, not everyone is fortunate to have like an amazing space like this. And like, I'd love to be able to learn how to grow like little plants on my balcony, or, you know, something like that.
I would do that. I mean, we have the space on my balcony.
I think the system has made us believe that we're powerless, that we're just at the mercy of the system. But we're not, because the system can only exist with us buying into the system. And if we don't, and we start creating our own reality, then the system can no longer exist that way.
This is our workout for the day.
What I think it takes to get anything done is, first of all, for people to start daring to imagine what would a cool city be like? What would it be like to live in a really awesome city? What would that look like? And then step 2 is to start taking some action.
It's beautiful and so meditative. Just kind of go in my zone.
Is that the end of the American dream?
No. I think the American dream is bigger than that. I think that's just one part of the American dream that's been the expression of the American dream in the past, couple decades. But I don't think that's the whole American dream. I think the American dream has to do with self-expression, to freedom, and it's been caught up in this kind of want to have, materialistic aspect of the American dream. But I think Americans are very optimistic people, and they will get back up.
With us now is Roy Oppenheim. Roy, it's a pleasure to have you back on the show.
Richard, good to see you again. Thank you.
Roy, this is, as I said in an earlier interview, an interesting time in history. And in your area of specialty, real estate law and so forth, what a strange time. Interest rates are so low. Homes that were worth a lot are worth less. Many people are suffering in the economy worldwide and here. Tell us what's happening.
Well, it's as if the world is upside down, frankly. I became a foreclosure defense attorney after literally being a real estate attorney for probably 18 or 20 years. I've been practicing for almost 25 years. And this whole idea that you would be able to defend someone in a foreclosure who stops paying their mortgage because they can't afford it was something that was foreign to me and to the bar at one point in time. And what happened was that when our phones stopped ringing as a real estate attorney back in 2007, 2008, friends and clients would start coming in who couldn't afford to pay their mortgage and felt that there was just something wrong with what happened. Mortgage process, what happened at the closing, we started to realize that in many, many cases, the banks did not have the legal right to bring the foreclosure.
Please explain what you mean by that.
I'm glad you asked that question. What I mean is that Wall Street basically paid the banks immediately when they issued the mortgage. And so the banks were in many cases paid back for issuing a mortgage that they knew or should have known was going to go into default. Many times people did not prepare proper financial documentation. Many times they were encouraged to prepare literally false financial documentation at the behest of mortgage brokers and individuals who worked for the banks. And this wasn't an isolated circumstance. This happened time and time again. And so then the banks would sell and package their mortgages into a securitized market, and then that market would sell these mortgages to pension plans, to foreign governments, to fireman funds and insurance companies, and then all different kinds of institutions. And that paper became junk, and it became worthless because people started defaulting on their loans. And why did they start defaulting? It's because Wall Street kept putting more and more pressure on the mortgage committee to come up with new mortgages so they could keep this juggernaut going. And the reality was that at some point there were no longer enough people to generate enough good loans to keep the process going. It was effectively one of the largest Ponzi schemes known to man. I mean, you think Madoff was a large Ponzi scheme. This is a Ponzi scheme of exponential proportions, far greater than what Madoff was involved with. And only now are we starting to see the lawsuits come through between the investors who were ripped off and defrauded by these large securitized trusts.
You mentioned the term Ponzi schemes, and it's really quite shocking. How could such an immense Ponzi scheme, as you describe it, come about?
Well, the problem was that the money that was being used to pay investors was really coming from effectively new loans, as opposed to from the interest that was supposed to be paid by the homeowners. And what happened is, as the homeowners were defaulting, they continued to make more and more new loans and to keep the juggernaut going. But eventually, it just effectively collapsed. And the problem is that the motivational factors that encourage this behavior were set up in an institutional way that the people who originated the loans were immediately paid. Bonuses were determined by the quarter or by the year, and not determined to see how long the loans would remain on the books in good standing. And so time and time again, you had people that ended up defaulting. And because they defaulted, it dragged down the entire value of real estate in the United States, which ultimately just tore down the entire economy. And it's a disgrace. It's a disgrace because people trusted their mortgage brokers, they trusted their banks, and if someone said that they could afford a certain loan, the likelihood was that you were going to respect the person on the other side, because historically people respected their bankers, and if they said, yeah, you could afford this, people would borrow the money. And the reality was that the banks knew, or certainly should have known, that they were driving the economy right off a cliff.
This is very interesting, Roy. I'd like us to continue, but we have to pause for these commercial messages. We'll be right back. We're back with Roy Oppenheim. Roy, how is it that Israel is doing rather well economically at this time?
On technology and on creating goods and products and services, and our economy until recently, unfortunately, was based to a large extent, in many ways, on trading things and not creating real value. And that's the problem with our Wall Street culture. In fact, one of the problems that we were seeing until recently is that our smartest and brightest kids, instead of going to good companies like Apple or Google or Facebook, would opt to go to a Goldman Sachs. And maybe now, for the first time, we're starting to see a reversion back of kids having that choice to go to companies that actually make things and move the ball forward in a productive way, in a cultural way. I don't think that trying to figure out the new greatest algorithm to how to rip someone else off, because if someone makes money in a trade, someone's going to lose money. So to figure out how to outsmart someone is really very productive from an economic perspective. And really that's what these companies are doing. I mean, when they do these flash transactions, it's important to be as close as possible to the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ, because you have to make sure that your algorithm runs quicker than the next guy. And you're talking about nanosecond kind of decisions. So to see who can be closer to the technology of the trading platform, but becomes a race. But there's no increased value that's created there. You're just trying to see if you can rip the next guy off, because every time there's a buyer, there's going to be a seller. Every time there's a seller, there's a buyer. So if you make money, they lose money. And so I don't see that as adding value. And it's a very unfortunate aspect of our economy.
Would you please be so kind and explain that in greater detail, because many of our viewers don't quite understand the nanosecond aspect of these transactions.
Well, what most people don't understand is that in the stock market today, it isn't little guys who are trading that makes up most of the trades, but maybe 70-75% of all trades are done by large institutions through hedge funds that are trading in flash nanoseconds, and they're buying and selling, based on these formulas that they've created. But the formulas are only as good as how close you are to the information and how close you are to the actual trading platform.
Could you give us an example of that?
Probably not.
Okay.
On a purely hypothetical basis, if you are a company that trades other people's money, if you're a hedge fund, you're going to want to be as close as possible either to the New York Stock Exchange or to the NASDAQ physically, so that your trades can beat the other guy's trade, literally by a millionth or a trillionth of a second. Because if your trade goes in first, your trade will be accepted before theirs. And so if you're in New Jersey, and the New York Stock Exchange is on Wall Street, that's not good. And if you're in South Florida, you might as well forget it. So people who actually vie to be as close as physically possible to wherever that trading platform is, so that they can get their trades in first. And they'll go in, they'll buy, they'll sell, they'll buy, and this will all be done in seconds. Nothing like what you and I are thinking about when you buy a stock and you keep it for 6 months or 6 years, or give it to someone as a bar mitzvah gift. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about where you just buy and sell, and you're constantly tweaking these secret formulas that are called algorithms of sorts, and they take all different kinds of factors into account, and they work for a while and then they stop working because things change, and then they have to go back and tweak it further. And there's nothing wrong with making money, but when that's all you're doing, you're not making money by making an iPad, or by making an iPhone, or by creating a Google. It's just not the same. And so they are handsomely rewarded, these young students, but they also could be rewarded handsomely by working in these other companies. And we're starting to see that change. With my own kids, I'm starting to see that their interests are focused more on furthering the societal ball and moving it down.
Thinking about the average American family, people with 2 jobs, raising a family, children and so forth, and observing the changes in the economy and the challenges and problems they face, and all of a sudden perhaps facing foreclosure. How is all of this affecting the actual individuals all across the United States?
Well, it's a wonderful question, Richard. I think it creates this malaise. I think it creates this form of almost like a social depression of sorts on individuals, and it takes away America's confidence and the sense that we're exceptional, which is terribly unfortunate. And I do believe America is exceptional. I believe our history is remarkable, and I believe we're just going through a little dip here. But I know we're coming back. But one of the nice things I see about how we're coming back is I'm seeing that the judicial system is starting to rebound now, in the sense of taking the banks to task. You have judges in New York, you have judges in Florida that are saying, wait a minute, this isn't right. You've done all these bad things, and we're going to hold you to task. And even though the SEC wants to settle with you, there's a federal judge in New York who says, no, you can't settle this. The settlement that you're about to introduce is unfair. You need to hold Citibank in this particular case accountable for what they did when they sold these bad bonds that we talked about earlier. And then you have judges in the 4th District Court of Appeals here in Florida who are saying, wait a minute, you bank, you had no right to bring this foreclosure. You didn't have the paper. You didn't have the mortgage. You didn't have the note. You didn't have the assignment. And you didn't jump through the necessary constitutional due process hoops, which we typically call standing, before you brought your foreclosure. And so we're dismissing your foreclosure. And we don't care that the trial court screwed up. We're telling this trial court not to do it again. What I called the privatization of the collection process, the banks literally almost hijacked the judicial system to act as their private collection agency for several years. I kept saying that, I kept writing about it, I kept talking about it, and people, I think, for a while thought I was like Chicken Little. And I kept saying the sky's falling, we're destroying ourselves, and we're hurting ourselves, and that we're going to become a third world nation, we're going to destroy the middle class, we're going to become a banana republic. People thought I was crazy. Thank God I wasn't, and I'm not. And thank God what we're now seeing is that we're seeing the institutions, these institutions that are strong enough to reverberate, are now bouncing back and are saying, wait a minute, this wasn't right. You can't do this. And so the banks are starting to recognize that maybe the foreclosure isn't their best process. Maybe they should keep people in their homes, because by not keeping people in their homes, they're destabilizing neighborhoods. You have cities like Cleveland and Detroit are spending hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. They are bulldozing entire neighborhoods of homes that have been foreclosed by the banks, where the banks haven't properly maintained those homes. And 60 Minutes did a piece on this, where they have to literally tear down the entire area because the homes have become public nuisances and they're worthless. And who owns these homes? The banks own these homes. Now, let's go back. What would have happened had the banks negotiated in some way with the homeowner? Even if they said, homeowner, we know you can't afford this home, so what we're going to do is we're going to take the home from you, but we're going to rent it back to you so your family, is not dislocated, it's not dislodged, so your neighbors have a real neighbor for the next 5 years. How much better would that have been for the bank than to foreclose, get a piece of property that is now absolutely worthless that gets bulldozed? I mean, how stupid can you be? And the answer is that I think that there were institutions like the Federal Reserve and other institutions within the United States government that were discouraging the banks from working with the homeowners. Sure, you have the president talking about working with the homeowners, but you had other institutions that were concerned about a social contagion of sorts, that if in fact you got a good deal on your home, then your neighbor would want that good deal. And so they were concerned about the ripple effect of what would happen if they cut a good deal for you, your neighbor would want the good deal, and so everyone would stop paying their mortgage. I mean, I think that was the real concern that the banks initially had, as well as some of the government regulatory agencies. But they were all wrong.
Amazing and fascinating. And on the other hand, we hear about low interest rates and all of these programs to assist people who are distressed. How real are they? Well, one of the problems is people are underwater, so they don't have enough equity in their homes to necessarily be able to get a mortgage and afford it. So you really have two problems. One is, do they have sufficient income? Because we still have a huge high unemployment rate in the United States. And the other is, do they have sufficient equity in their homes so that a bank is willing to refinance? But the reality is the bank doesn't want to refinance. The bank wants to try and extract the highest interest rate from the homeowner for as long as possible, when in fact you can get a mortgage today for 3.5%. But there's so many mortgages still out there at 6.5%. It's just insane. And so if in fact you did refinance, then the investors would take a hit. So the investors are not likely to want to take that hit. But what ends up happening is then the homeowner stops paying, the property goes into foreclosure, maybe you start a fight and the homeowner stays in the home for years, or in the alternative, the bank ends up with the property and the home gets destroyed and the bank ends up with nothing. You've written extensively about all of this. Where can our audience learn more about your opinions in all of these crucial matters? We have a number of places. I mean, for one, we have the South Florida Law Blog, which is southfloridalawblog.com. We have our website, which is oppenheimlaw.com. And I also have a scholarly piece that's coming out with Jacqueline Trask, my associate, where we're talking about what we characterize as black magic, the deconstruction of securitized trusts, where we have I've written a law review article for the Stetson Law Review. It's already on our website, but it hasn't been formally published yet by Stetson. It's going to be published in the spring or the late winter, and there we address all the legal mishappenings that have occurred as it relates to foreclosures by the banks in their attempt to try and illegally foreclose on people's homes, and how foreclosure defense attorneys then can use this to their advantage to negotiate on behalf of the homeowner and try and get a better deal. Before we end this conversation, and this is not particularly the happiest subject matter we could be spending this afternoon on, but before we conclude, what message would you like to share with our audience with regard to the future? I think that we have not yet hit the peak in the history of America. I think we are just starting out. I mean, I don't think we're an empire that's on the decline. I think we are still continuing to grow and develop. I think people have to understand that as technology changes, as the world becomes a smaller place, as our trading partners become more important, that we have to have proper alliances with the rest of the world. But I think that anywhere you go in the world, people still look to America as that shining hill, that shining city on the hill. And if I can do my part, we will always be that shining city. We should all do our part. Thank you so very much for being with us today. Richard, thank you so very, very much. Pleasure. This brings us to the end of our special show for today. From On Location in Western Florida with Roy Oppenheim, I'm Richard Peritz. Thank you for being with us.